to pull the major party that is closest to the way you're thinking, to what you're thinking. You must show them that you're capable of not voting for them.
Because the way the Democratic Party is run now for quite a number of presidential cycles is they pick a nominee in a kind of half-assed process that doesn't really represent much of anybody. And then they tell everybody to just shut up. Don't bring up anything that will complicate life for your nominee. You know he's not for you on this. Why badger him? He's not going to be for you for reasons that you don't understand but are good reasons. Shut up. Turn off your brains.
If you don't show them you're capable of not voting for them, they don't have to listen to you. I promise you that. I worked within the Democratic Party. I didn't listen or have to listen to anything on the left while I was working in the Democratic Party because the left had nowhere to go.
Right there. You have nowhere else to go. The left had nowhere else to go. And not just you had nowhere else to go. We actually did have places to go, but for reasons of cowardice. We were cowed, and cowed in such a way that the philosophical responsibility to represent the interests of the poor, the middle class, to be the conscience of this nation was pushed to the side, and we effectively backed one hack after the next. What he just said there is politics 101. You're not going to be given anything. How much political leverage do you have in order to get the things that you want? And if you are willing to effectively, continuously, for the last 40 years, back any random hack that they put up, despite the fact that they don't represent your interests, they attack you and items and ideas that you want to get across the finish line, if you continue to support them, when they give you nothing in return, then they have no reason to give you anything. Yes, they can call you sexist, they can call you racist, they can call you bros, they can call you all that stuff. They can tell you we're not going to offer you anything. You're just going to back us because Donald Trump is a maniac. They can do that year after year after year. And the left would allow itself to stand there and get browbeat and feel some kind of way, screaming, oh, they keep blaming me for the loss of this random hack. Why do you accept that framing of the argument? Why do you give two shits about what the Democratic Party and the ineptness of that party say about you and your own? You're not a Democrat. That's almost like saying this Republican didn't vote for my Democratic hack. No, the Republican didn't vote for your Democratic hack because you're not the same thing. My point is this. Anything that you want to get done, real, in regards to politics, from the standpoint of policy, is not come from shaming, it's not come from browbeating, it mostly comes from political leverage. For the longest time, you've been put in a situation where they don't care what you think, they don't care about your ideas. Yes, they can walk over you, they can say bad things about you, they can attack you relentlessly, because at the end of the day, they believe, and for the last 40, 50 years, correctly so, that regardless of what they do to you, you're so terrified of the monsters in the other party that you're willing to accept whatever monster is in this one. This kind of loving apathy. No, they're not going to do anything for you, but by the same token, they're not going to be Republicans. At some point, the left needs to grow the fuck up and deal with that. You're over a barrel because you accept something that's just fundamentally not true. That you have nowhere else to go. You do have somewhere else to go, even if it means not voting for that random hack that they put up. Even if it means vocally using your political leverage to get political concessions for the things that you want in the political space. If that means that the Democrat loses, who gives a shit? Let him lose. Your objectives go beyond any one specific election. Look over the context of the elections back in 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 12 years ago, 16 years ago. And what have you noticed? The same policy or the same plan is at work. What that gentleman just described, pick any random hack in a particular process, push that random hack and tell everybody else that you got to vote for him, say that the Republican is horrible, that we need the Supreme Court seat, that blah, 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 blah. And then you get the Democrat that is willing to cut Social Security, willing to privatize Social Security, willing to destroy welfare, willing to expand the prison population, willing to give 95% of the income gains to the top 1%, willing to continue the drone wars, willing to back up Wall Street as opposed to deal with homeowners. Whether that's a Democratic presidency or whether that's a Republican presidency, they amount to almost fundamentally the same thing. Donald Trump right now is attending towards industry. If this was a Democrat in office, do you honestly believe that they would be doing something drastically different than attending to industry's interests over that of the population itself? And if that Democrat was in office, do you honestly think they would be attacking him in the way that they're weakly attacking Trump? The fact is that they are so weak in their opposition that Donald Trump, who is literally costing lives and has blood on his hands, they can't create a cohesive argument to push back against that president. They are so close in regards to the way they're being perceived in the public and the small minutiae of their ideas that basically the public looks at them and calls it a wash. You guys are effectively even to me. So even though Trump is responsible for a large loss of life and large numbers of people getting sick, and that will continue to take place, the public don't see the Democratic Party as being a credible alternative. You allow that by not having any level of accountability in the political process. The race to the bottom has effectively given you a Congress that is utterly neutered in regards to getting anything real and tangible accomplished for our interests. That's called no accountability. Meaning, because you put in any random hack Democrat, that random hack Democrat expects your support just because of who they are not because of what they're going to do for you. You haven't voted for them because of what they're going to do for you for a very long time. They've been able to get your support entirely just for not being a Republican. Why does that guy have to do anything? There's no accountability in that process. Lefties are always going to vote for him regardless because they're so terrified of Republicans. Where is accountability in that process? And if there is no accountability in that process, how do you ever get anything that you want? And in moments like this, where you actually need a government to represent your interests, to actually take provocative action to ensure that people don't get kicked out of their house, that people have food on their tables, that people's health care is taken care of, that people aren't forced to go back to work because they can't afford this or that. When you actually need these guys to do their goddamn jobs, you don't get that. You get them passing a $4.5 trillion giveaway to corporations, while everybody else gets a $1,200 check for 1 month. Fucking astonishing. That's not necessarily where I was supposed to go with this, but that's kind of where it ended up. I want to show that video of Lawrence O'Donnell saying that every show from here until the next election, and then a few days after. That's how much I love that clip. Because that's honest to God fucking politics. That's what politics is. How do you get people who don't agree with you to knuckle under and give you what you want politically? How do you do it? How do you do it? You honestly think you can negotiate to get something like Social Security passed, or you can negotiate with the Republican Party? They wouldn't even negotiate on Obamacare, which was just a handout to the health insurance industry. How are you going to get anything of your political priorities passed? We are in the middle of a fucking pandemic. You've had people trying to go to the hospital and were turned away because they didn't have insurance and ended up dying. You had other people who couldn't get like $4,000 bills for getting treatment for this particular virus. You have people who are dying because they can't necessarily get care or don't necessarily want to get care. You have others who are forcing themselves to go to work because their health insurance is tied to their job, and their job is effectively not giving them any kind of guaranteed sick leave. I'm making the point that even in the midst of something like this, where the public itself looks and says, yes, Medicare for all would be an amazing thing at this point, and you get a 9-point jump, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and you still get Joe Biden coming out saying, yeah, I'm not for Medicare for all. I'm not for that. That wouldn't help. It's ludicrous, by the way, to believe that a program, a healthcare system that works for the interests of healthcare as opposed to the interests of profits, wouldn't have been able to assist in a situation where our capitalistic system prioritized profits. It's a ludicrous assessment that Joe Biden is giving here. Those people who needed to go get help, they would have gotten help. Those people who needed to get healthcare costs, that wouldn't have necessarily been a barrier to them getting assistance for healthcare at that particular point. The ventilators that we were investing money into, those things probably could have gotten accomplished with more attentiveness to this notion that the goal is not entirely profit, the goal is healthcare. It's a fundamentally different way of looking at our healthcare system. And Biden, even in the middle of a pandemic, even when the overwhelming majority of Democrats are for it, even when the overwhelming majority of the population is for it, the Democratic Party lines up with their oligarchs and still come away with, nope, we're not going to do it. Your pathway to getting anything accomplished is being willing to say, no dice. This is my litmus test. I'm not going to have a race to the bottom, because a race to the bottom gets me ineffectual politicians, and it makes sure my interest doesn't get passed, and it makes sure that I'm entirely and continuously disrespected in the political space. So yeah, my strength is being able to walk the fuck away. You're not seeing to my interests, so why am I going to support you? You can be there. That is a place to be. And in being a place to be, if you get a large number of people who organize with you and take that same political disposition, the world changes. That's your political pathway to get what you want, not this other stuff of trying to browbeat other people and giving you stuff. No, your pathway is using political force and political leverage to get what you want, whether that's general strikes, whether that's rental strikes, whether that's them shutting the fucking airports down when Donald Trump refuses to pay those airport workers, effectively have those guys working without getting a paycheck. There's something to be said about taking a certain disposition that gets you what you want, using the leverage of the crisis and your new value as human beings because of that, to get what you want politically. That's your way to get things accomplished. The ability to walk, the ability to organize outside of the political space, the ability to be able to attack both and to tie this political system to the failures of our particular systemic failures. That's the way, that's the path. And of all the things that is taking place right now, that's the one thing that's not happening. You have strikes and whatnot that are kind of just spidey across the country, but not an organized idea of worker solidarity, that those warehouse workers that are there that are being exposed to the virus, those McDonald's workers who are frontline, those 7-Eleven workers, those people who are delivery drivers, those people who for the most part were exploited and shit on and paid horrible wages are now the front lines of our particular society, ensuring that we get food and resources. Why wouldn't you stretch your wings in something like that? And as just part of the population, why wouldn't you back them up? Because in real terms, backing them up is effectively backing yourself up. Under this notion of worker solidarity, we're not going to agree on everything. But in grand general terms, a society and an economy that works to the benefit of the 99% as opposed to the benefit of the top 1% where they get to exploit all the resources seems fucking maddening to me. That would be what rational actors choose. Perpetual vulnerability. You're in a situation right now, where they don't have masks, they don't have equipment, they don't have the vaccines or the medicines that we need. And right now, we had to accept large shipments from Russia because we couldn't attend to our own affairs. And even in the midst of that, our companies are selling supplies overseas to other countries. This is our world. They don't care about us. That's something that needs to be understood from flesh to bone, and that needed to be understood in the context of a political movement and a workers' movement that goes and broadens beyond entirely just the political space and goes into this notion of all of us are on the line, all of us are representing each of our interests, even if it's not on every specific political item. In grand general terms, a society and an economy that works to the benefit of all of us is better than one that works to the benefit of the 1%. And reorganize this economy. If you want to keep capitalism, fair enough. But certainly, as workers, policies that would expand our income, that would expand this notion of worker agency within the various corporations, putting workers on the boards of these companies, having many of these things, having a worker co-op section. There are things that we can do to benefit us, whether that's Medicare for all, whether that's getting rid of college loans. I am saying that your government should be run to the benefit of the majority of the population. And the issues of healthcare, issues of education, those things are to the benefit of each of us. And because it's to the benefit of each of us, fighting for one effectively fights for yourself. That should be the way we look at politics. That is not the way we look at politics. And unfortunately, for the last 40, 50, 60 years after FDR, the left, for the most part, has been maligned and ignored for that very reason. Cowardice. Right now, taking a page from that file of they don't care about you, the Democratic nomination that is supposed to take place is going to be postponed. Right here, DNC convention. Now, Biden had been pushing for this to be postponed, so fair enough. But what I said today, I said, you know what? Just because he's pushing for the convention to be postponed, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be against still continuing to have the elections. What do you know? Joe Biden is still against continuing to have the elections. Meaning, in the middle of a pandemic, where scientists have basically said, stay home, where 90-something% of the American population is under a stay-home order, meaning don't go out if you don't have to go out. If it's not an emergency, if you don't have to get your weed or your food, stay home. The Democratic Party cancels convention, or at the very least postpones it. So great. But again, they're continuing with the election, meaning despite the CDC and these other scientists saying stay home, the Democratic Party is like, yeah, we need to wrap this up though. We need to wrap this up. And we're perfectly okay with pushing forward with the election in the various states. This is a maddening perspective. And in real terms, Tom Perez, Joe Biden, Simone Sanders, all of those people literally in real terms have and will have blood on their hands. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox, a late night soapbox. If you guys dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal Patron. This content in real terms is brought to you by you, and you make this show possible. Wow, it's been like 3-4 years at this point, right? Reality is so weird, man. The corners and the turns. Started off in software and then ending up effectively doing a YouTube channel that gets parlayed into a radio gig. So weird. All right, so the Democratic Party, yes, canceling or postponing the convention, that's fine. Joe Biden at one point even made the point of saying, look, I don't even know if we're going to have the convention at this point. That's how bad things have gotten. Joe Biden has already said that he doesn't know if he is going to be on the debate stage. At this point, he's focused on the coronavirus. Now, they need 1,990 points in order to win the primary. Joe Biden has, I think, like 1,200 or something. That is a long ways away from 1,900, especially since you have, about half of the states to go. And you have a situation where the states that are still going ahead, some of those states have been postponed because they are concerned about people, dying from an infection. When Sanders was asked about this, and this was, I think it was Super Tuesday or something to that effect, or not Super Tuesday, it was a few weeks ago. But when he was asked about this, look, should we proceed with these elections considering the CDC is saying that we shouldn't have all of these people coming together like this? I mean, it looks a bit dangerous. That's just Sanders' answer. Rational human being.
Finally, the CDC has now put out a recommendation saying that any grouping of more than 50 people should not take place.
Yeah.
I mean, should there be a primary on Tuesday?
That is a very good question. And as you know, Louisiana and Georgia and Puerto Rico have delayed their elections, postponed, like dates for the future. Look, elections dates are very, very important. We don't want to be getting into the habit of messing around with them. But you remember, and I just researched this, 9/11, there was a primary in New York City. Do you remember that?
I don't know.
There was a primary, and it was canceled for obvious reasons in New York City, and it was rescheduled 2 weeks later. I would hope that governors listen to the public health experts, and what they are saying is, you just indicated, we don't want gatherings of more than 50 people. And I'm thinking about some of the elderly people sitting behind the desks, registering people, doing all that stuff. Does not make a lot of sense. I'm not sure that it does.
Finally,
rational human being. You have an infectious pandemic. You have a situation where many of the states, the pandemic is utterly uncontrolled. Right now, the United States has, let's refresh. I want to get an immediate number. 245,066 cases. It's exponentially going up. 189 new cases. 6,075 total deaths with 6 new deaths. That number was over 1,000 a few minutes ago or a few hours ago, so they're probably jumped into the next day at this point. I guess my point is, this is something that is only going to get worse. They're talking about 200,000 deaths being a good thing. Now, yeah, this has to do with the incompetence of the administration. It has to do with the ill preparedness of the administration. It also has to do with us not necessarily taking this seriously and squandering the 3-4 months in advance that we had to prepare for this. It also has a lot to do with not having a social safety net, not having the capabilities for people to be able to go to hospital to get checked, not having the testing, not having the vaccines, the protective equipment, not having enough resources where you aren't forced to go to work, even though you might not necessarily be in the best of health. I hope you understand what I mean. A lot of this stuff is ideological and it's baked into the very basis of our society and the way that we operate. Sanders' point is, look, there are real things. Human beings are real things. The election is not something that needs to take place at that very specific moment. The infection itself is raging at this point. We have all of these people who are losing their lives. Yeah, let's not tempt this. let's just postpone the election and we can always get back to the election, whether that's even postponing the election back in November or, for that matter, just in the primaries itself. The coronavirus is expected to be somewhat of a season, not something that lasts for 8, 10, 12 months. So basically, you're just talking about waiting something out before you go and actually make your vote. And if it bugs you that much, take a week or two and figure out a way to do mail-in ballots. There are ways to do your elections. It doesn't have to be something where you go to the polls. And if you are a rational actor and you care about the population itself, you care about whether or not people get ill and get sick and die, you care about whether those poll workers, many of which are elderly, who's interacting with the public itself, either in talking, either touching licenses or documentation or whatever else like that, meaning you're spreading this in multiple ways. You're spreading this in the contact from the standpoint of the poll worker to somebody else, or from somebody else to the poll worker, who then turns around and spreads it to somebody else. I hope you understand what I mean. This is screwy on several fronts. You're putting a lot of people in a very small location where social distancing was not necessarily possible. We saw it in the last elections. It was a fuck fest when many of the poll workers didn't show up. Many of the people didn't show up to vote because they were terrified. They didn't want to get ill. And then you ended up with people actually getting the illness, getting coronavirus. So right here, this is Jacksonville, Florida. Right now in Florida, there are 3 poll workers that have been diagnosed with corona. Understand what that means. That means that the poll workers who was interacting with the public, everybody that they interacted with in the entirety of the public at this point have to be contacted because they are potentially contaminated. Each one of those people who they interacted with, meaning if any of them, whatever percentage, ends up with the coronavirus, a future percentage of them will also interact with people. They may have elderly grandparents, they may have kids that they need to take care of, but those people who now are infected will now potentially spread it to somebody else. And this for an election that didn't need to take place. Right here, Jackson, Florida. So right here, the worker began displaying symptoms 6 days after the poll work. Tested on Friday, the positive result took 3 days to receive. From the 360 voters at this location, as well as staff, the advice is to take appropriate steps and to seek counsel and medical advice. These voters will be contacted by mail or phone in the coming days. The media releases denotes. The Duval coronavirus patient is not only election day worker fallen by the COVID-19. In Broward County, 2 poll workers followed a similar trajectory. In Broward County, you have 2 people who came down with the coronavirus. And that's kind of the point. And this is why people like me, who, yes, do want some of these postponed for political reasons, but also just as a rational human being that knows that the coronavirus is not necessarily going to last forever, that the election date is contrived and you can push it back a few weeks or, for that matter, even a month and still do what you need to do in the context of the election. And sending people to the polls when you have a pandemic that can either kill, even when the people are asymptomatic, and it can spread that to the various people at those polling locations. And as those people leave those polling locations, can spread it to wherever they go. This is a recipe for disaster. When I make the case that Donald Trump has blood on his hands, it's because he's taken certain policies that effectively is losing life, either through his inaction or just comedically bad actions. In this case, I don't see how the Democratic Party can't be accused of the exact same thing. Listen to Joe Biden. Simone Sanders made the pitch to get people into the polls on days that were when it was already clear that there were issues associated with those people going to the polls. Right now, Joe Biden asked, all right, Joe, what about the elections? Yes, we're going to postpone the DNC convention, but what about the elections? What about the elections?
Listen to the scientists. A convention having tens of thousands of people in one arena is very different than having people walk into a polling booth with accurate spacing to 6 to 10 feet apart, one at a time, going in and have machines scrubbed down. But I do think there are going to be a lot more. I think you could hold the election as well, dealing with mail-in ballots and same-day registration. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done. That's for the Wisconsin courts and folks to decide. But I think it's possible to do both, to have both more mail-in ballots people, and today is the last day, I guess, till 5 o'clock to ask for one. It was an hour time difference from where I am in Wisconsin. And I think it could be done based on what I've been hearing from the news and what I understand the governor and others are saying. But that's for them to decide.
That is treacherously bad advice. That is treacherously bad advice. Again, in the page of the book, they don't give a shit about you, Joe Biden. Basically, what this boils down to is they don't care whether or not to withhold the convention, the DNC convention. That's basically just them. They themselves don't want to get sick. So for them and from their standpoint, yeah, let's not do that. Let's postpone that until, better times. But from the standpoint of the election itself, that's not them, that's you. And in it being you, they need you to go and put their hack over the finish line. And the last thing they want, they know that the longer Joe Biden goes, where he has to engage with the public during this crisis, where it's not locked in, the longer there's a potential and an opportunity for him to utterly and entirely collapse. They know that this election is not necessarily over, which is why they're trying to wrap this shit up as soon as possible. They're pushing to get this election and have these people go into a situation where it is empirically clear, because we've already seen the results of this in Florida. We saw what the polling locations were like, where many of them didn't have the antiseptics, many of them didn't have the wash downs. In some cases, the poll workers didn't show up. And again, this is not a situation where this must and need to take place. Joe Biden, Simone Sanders, this campaign, the DNC, them not shutting down those elections and postponing those elections is effectively allowing people to go into a petri dish where they're putting their lives and the lives of their loved ones on the line, all to get this senile, badly spoken, poorly articulate man over the finish line. They don't care about you, and they should not get your support. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all. And this